pick battles big enough to matter, small enough to win. Apartheid does not happen spontaneously, like bad weather conditions. But for the children of the poorest people we're stripping the curriculum, removing the arts and music, and relink the children into useful labor. We're not valuing a child for the time in which she actually is a child. I encourage teachers to speak in their own voices. Don't use the gibberish of the standards writers. During the decades after Brown v. Board of Education, there was terrific progress. Tens of thousands of public schools were integrated racially. During that time, the gap between black and white achievement narrowed. Instead of seeing these children for the blessings that they are, we are measuring them only by the standard of whether they will be future deficits or assets for our nation's competitive needs. Many of those who argue for vouchers say that they simply want to use competition to improve public education. I don't think it works that way, and I've been watching this for a long time. Children are not simply commodities to be herded into line and trained for the jobs that white people who live in segregated neighborhoods have available. The cause of homelessness is lack of housing. Childhood ought to have at least a few entitlements that aren't entangled with utilitarian considerations. One of them should be the right to a degree of unencumbered satisfaction in the sheer delight and goodness of existence in itself. The niche effect of charter schools guarantees a swift and vicious deepening of class and racial separation. It is a commonplace by now to say that the urban school systems of America contain a higher percentage of Negro children each year. So long as these kinds of inequalities persist, all of us who are given expensive educations have to live with the knowledge that our victories are contaminated because the game has been rigged to our advantage. I am opposed to the use of public funds for private education. If you grow up in the South Bronx today, or in South Central Los Angeles or Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, you quickly come to understand that you have been set apart and that there's no will in this society to bring you back into the mainstream. An awful lot of people come to college with this strange idea that there's no longer segregation in America's schools, that our schools are basically equal. Neither of these things is true. At that time, I had recently finished a book called Amazing Grace, which many people tell me is a very painful book to read. Well, if it was painful to read, it was also painful to write. I had pains in my chest for 2 years while I was writing that book. Even if you never do anything about this, you've benefited from an unjust system. You're already the winner in a game that was rigged to your advantage from the start. I think a lot of people don't have any idea of how deeply segregated our schools have become all over again. Most textbooks are not honest in what they teach our high school students. I'd love to go back and teach primary school. I used to teach 4th grade and 5th grade. I'd love to spend several years teaching kindergarten or maybe 3rd grade. If we allow public funds to be used to support our relatively benign, morally grounded schools, we will have to allow those public funds to be used for any type of private school. In the book, I write about children in 1st grade who were taught to read by reading want ads. They learned to write by writing job applications. Imagine what would happen if anyone tried to do that to children in a predominantly white suburban school. Nationally, overwhelmingly non-white schools receive $1,000 less per pupil than overwhelmingly white schools. The greatest difference between now and 1964, when I began teaching, is that public policy has pretty much eradicated the dream of Martin Luther King. The ones I pity are the ones who never stick out their neck for something they believe, never know the taste of moral struggle, and never have the thrill of victory. The primary victims of Katrina, those who were given the least help by the government, those rescued last or not at all, were overwhelmingly people of color, largely hidden from the mainstream of society. What I tell these young people is, the world is not as dangerous as the older generation would like you to believe. Anyone I know who has ever taken a risk and lost a job has ended up getting a better one 2 years later. When I was teaching in the 1960s in Boston, there was a great deal of hope in the air. Martin Luther King Jr. was alive. Malcolm X was alive. Great leaders were emerging from the Southern Freedom Movement.